Hello, dear attendees. It is my pleasure to welcome you all into this session as part of the 12th International Conference for Teachers of English, Language Teaching during COVID-19. Thank you for tuning in today. I have the honor to introduce Professor Suzanne Rajkummar. Professor Suzanne is one of the 2019 TESOL International Ambassadors, Local Assistant Coordinator, Action TESOL, Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, ex-President, Honduras TESOL, innovator of the CBC, Codebreaker, ESL Game, dual immersion advocate with more than 29,000 teaching hours using a student-centered approach focused on meaningful learning and teaching. Without further ado, please enjoy the session, Teaching Bilinguals in a Multilingual World. Professor Suzanne, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Diego. That's very kind of you. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing my screen before engaging with everyone in our audience. So if you'll just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, Diego, can you confirm for me if everyone can see my screen?
Yes, just perfectly.
Okay, then. So welcome everyone to our presentation today. And I don't know if it's possible for me to see. Yes, I think I should be able to see some of the, I don't know if the video box is blocking part of the video. Okay, so this topic, teaching bilinguals in a multilingual world, you know, I am actually raising bilinguals. It was something that as a young teacher, it was something that came up. I studied languages, and moving from Trinidad and Tobago to Honduras, it totally transformed my perspective on what it means to be bilingual. And today in particular, in 2021, we're going to look at what it means to be teaching bilinguals today in what we now have, what the internet has given us, this multilingual world. So Colin Baker has a statement. He calls bilinguals environmentally friendly individuals because they bring us the beauty of diversity of the world by mixing with different persons. So I hope you're able to join in this and we get to explore how to teach and how to define our bilinguals now as we are. So let's connect a little bit. I know we have some people in our audience, and just to get to know, this is a way that I engage with my students, is that you can ask me any 3 questions based on the next slide. I identify as an educator, a teacherpreneur, a mom, a content creator, and a podcaster. So you get, we get 1 minute, 3 questions, and I will answer as quickly as I can. So are there any questions, Diego, in the chat box?
No, there aren't any so far.
Okay, then. So basically, those are the different kinds of projects that I have been involved in. And Dr. Brene Brown suggests to us that, you know, as we continue to grow, these are different things that we get involved in. So,
Professor Suzanne, just
yes?
excuse me, there is actually one question. It is your favorite thing about being a bilingual mom. What is it?
Oh, that one. Oh, that's easy. The words that they invent, the words that they create. My little one right now, the word is senda. Senda. Everything is mama, senda me tal cosa. Senda is like, what do you want to say? Like, séndame la aplicación. For him, senda is his enviar. So he is, I love that. I love the creativity. That's fascinating how we get to observe. That for me is the most precious part of raising bilinguals, and especially in this multilingual setting that we're in. Thank you for that question. My older son, his was the word doto, because he understood that daughter meant a girl. So he would describe his dad's car as the cars. He would say boys would go with dad and girls would go with mom. So he would say, let's go to the car, the car for the dotos. So he created the word, the masculine word for daughter, he created dotos thinking that that is what it meant because he was learning about masculine and feminine. So that is an internal, and that's something that we're going to explore as we discuss this multilingual world that we're walking into. Thank you very much, Diego. Are there any other questions?
Right, that would be better.
No, that's the only one.
Will be better. And
okay. All right. So I saw someone mentioned that their son is Aguata. I would love that they could put in the chat box what they mean by that. What their son means by that. Aguata.
Or teacher for early elementary grade. You already know how important it is to enhance.
I think there's another
there's
feed coming across.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was already deactivated. Yeah.
All right then. So if the person writes into the chat box like what their child refers to as being aguata, it would, I would appreciate understanding what that means. So coming to our question. So what we're going to be looking at is in this session, teaching bilinguals. One, how are we doing that? One, we've been faced by the pandemic. It's about language teaching during the whole COVID session. It has taken everyone in the education field and tossed us in a blender and said, let's see what kind of smoothie comes out. And in that, we're going to be looking at who are these bilinguals right now in the world today. What is the definition? So it'd be very interesting if our participants who are in the chat room can briefly state very shortly, what is a bilingual? How do you define bilingual for you? Who is a bilingual? And in this multilingual world, I mean, why? You would think that a bilingual is easy. It's a person who speaks 2 languages is what I used to think. So do we have any contributions in the chat box, Diego?
Not yet. We do have one, but the meaning for aguata,
okay.
It was water and agua. So it was like a blend of those words.
Pretty much. Code switching and the transition of words. A lot of the research that I have done, it's something that I'm fascinated by because it reflects how our learners, how our brain works. And it has a negative stigma. But really and truly, it's a very creative aspect of how we as human beings learn and create.
We have more contributions here. It says bilingual is similar to have 2 brains.
Okay, pretty cool.
We have someone at an extent can communicate in 2 languages or codes and being fluent in 2 languages.
All right, pretty awesome. So let's see how far that takes us and what that means, because as we're going to look into how many languages make your linguistic repertoire. So like, for example, when you're listening to music, do you listen only to Spanish or English music? Or if you're cooking, are you following recipes that are from one particular language, international cuisine, watching foreign films, sporting enthusiasts? I've always been particularly surprised by how and I can use the word normal, and I'll put normal in air quotes, when it comes to the World Cup in Honduras, how suddenly everyone seems to have this multilingual pronunciation of the names of the players from different teams. Now, you would think that players from Arabia or from the Asian countries, that the names might be difficult. But when you listen to sporting enthusiasts talk about the characters and talk about how they are, their brain gets ready because they're so into the World Cup. Their brain does everything possible to acquire the sounds necessary to describe the players. And that's something we're going to talk about when we talk about individual bilingualism. Okay. So I want you to keep this question in mind to everyone who's here with me. How many languages make up your linguistic repertoire? This is an example of my children's linguistic repertoire. I am from Trinidad and Tobago. My husband is from Honduras. Spain influenced both Trinidad and Tobago and Honduras, but we have different elements of that. India, my name is Rajkummar. So there is a descendancy that's a heritage that is with me. The United Kingdom has also influenced Trinidad and Tobago, being an ex-British colony. Their grandparents live in Canada. So there's an entire world of linguistics related to that. They watch anime and they enjoy, whether it's Pokemon, Genshin Impact, or it's an entire world of dealing with Japan, as well as they get to travel to the United States on vacation. So all of these countries are influencing their life as they are living on a daily basis. So this is what it would look like. If we look at the language base of it, what would the language element look like? And we can see here that in the language, Rajkummar and Martinez, the Indian and the Spanish parts of it, English is used in my house. I use it mostly for communication, work, and entertainment. Spanish also is for communication, work, heritage learning. I want my children to identify with their country as well as they identify with my own. French, I do some work in French, not as much as I used to, and it's mostly for entertainment, movies, food, elements like that. Japanese, my kids are learning Japanese at school, and anime is their main source of entertainment. And Hindi. Hindi is something that it comes from my culture. It is the language of my descendants, and I use it, whether it's in the color, whether it's in the clothing, whether it is in how we cook food at home and we talk about the food. Actually, yesterday I did something, trying something on TikTok, and my 15-year-old was very critical, and he said, "Mommy, you know that word that you use?" And he said, puhar, which is a word that means sort of a lazy kind of job about something. And he said, "This is what this would be like." So I laughed because I thought, he doesn't know the language, but in the moments when I have used the word, he now can relate it to a situation, especially when I'm talking about the quality of something that he's done. So here we see that this bilingual mind actually is functioning in a multilingual context, because not only is he associating quality and quality systems with one, his brain is connecting based on how I have used the language with them at home. So that question about what does your linguistic repertoire look like, Diego, do we have any comments in the chat box regarding, did anyone share how many languages they speak or how many languages are in their repertoire? Do we have any sharing?
We do have
Diego, your microphone is turned off.
Oh, sorry. So let me see. I have here a comment about what about English varieties? Jamaican, Tini, Cayman English, or Trini, by the way.
Yeah.
Then Creole.
Of course.
Creole in the islands, Spanish, English, and French.
I went with the standard languages because I did not have space. If let's say this reflects, that's why I said my children. This is their linguistic repertoire. But if I were to add my linguistic repertoire to here, my linguistic repertoire would involve all those other elements. Definitely Jamaican, I grew up on Caribbean poetry, the terminology of the words. So my linguistic repertoire would be much wider than this. But currently, use in my home, this is what my boys, one is 15 and one is 7. This is the linguistic repertoire that is around them. This is what it is like raising multilingual bilinguals. So they have access, they will hear music in Hindi, they will dress culturally, they will hear me sing songs, Spanish songs from my home, not ranchera. It is a lot of more South American style. My aunts were like, "Oh, Sue, you're in Honduras. Now there's a lot of parang for Navidad." And I'm like, no, it's not our traditional Christmas music in Trinidad and Tobago is very, very, villancicos are the songs that they sing in my country. And it's very sad in Honduras. There's not that much villancicos. It's very much a ranchera element, which impacts the Spanish linguistic repertoire of the people that live in Honduras, which also is very, very interesting because if this were mine, I would add Italian because I'm studying Italian too. So as I expand my multilingual repertoire, my linguistic experience, this is the same thing. My kids are not extraordinary. I mean, of course, they're extraordinary for me. I'm their mom, but they are normal, a representation of normal students that we have right now. These are what our kids are exposed to. If your kids are into anime, then they're exposed to Asian languages, whether they're listening to it. My son can pronounce whether he's watching Attack of Titans or Genshin Impact, or whether it's Japanese or Chinese characters. I'm amazed when wait, when did you pick up that phonetic? And this would take us to, how do we define bilingual? They're exposed to Asian languages, whether they're listening to it.
We would like our attendees, make sure your microphones are off so we don't have any interruption. Professor Rajkummar, we have another comment here about person saying, I speak Spanish and English, and sign language as well.
Definitely. I love sign language. And I remember that epiphany moment when I thought, okay, I can use certain phrases. I'm not very fluent at it, but I used to use my letters to spell words. And that's how I would communicate. And then it occurred to me one time when I met someone in Spanish, is it the same? So you can be bilingual, you can have Spanish words. What would be the signs for it? Completely different. I mean, it blew my mind when I thought of, wait a second, if you have English, you have Spanish, and I'll summarize it like this. I remember with my son, when we were describing the sound of a dog, I was telling him, well, the dog goes woof, woof. And his grandmother in Honduras, my mother-in-law, said, no, the dog goes wow, wow. And I'm like, but woof, woof, wow. And I'm like, we have a Spanish-speaking dog? So the phonics, the sounds, the onomatopoeias that are so different, that it's quite refreshing when and I think I agree wholeheartedly with Colin Baker when he says that the diversity and the beauty, learning another language opens that to us. So when we're educating these bilinguals, and I have a term that's here on the screen that says, how do we define bilingual today? If we're reading research on bilingual, we will find bilinguals with limited proficiency is one description. Subtractive bilingualism, that's another term. Balanced bilingualism. So what is all of this? What are all these terms about? Carolyn Coombs suggests that in most people who consider themselves bilingual fall somewhere between bilinguals with limited proficiency and balanced bilingualism. Now, I was quite, for me, it was amazing for me to get this study, because suddenly here was studies and research talking about differences that I was identifying in Honduras, but I didn't have the vocabulary to describe it. So this is one of the things as educators, when we continue studying, it also expands our mind. In some of our colleagues are doing investigations, some of our colleagues are identifying how language is used. And there's now this spectrum. There's a spectrum that says we've got bilinguals with limited proficiency. Maybe they're a good reader, but they can't speak the language. Perhaps they can listen and they can communicate, but they're not very good writing a letter or speaking formally. So therefore, do we disqualify them? And do we say that they're not bilingual? Well, we can describe them as bilinguals with limited proficiency, elements that we will discuss when we talk about terminology of individual bilingualism. And balanced bilingualism is sort of the direction we want to go into. I would describe myself now as a balanced bilingual in Spanish, French, and in 3 languages. In Spanish, French, and English, I can read a document, I can analyze the document, and I can probably produce. My French, not so much, it has dropped. But in my Spanish and my English, I can work comfortably in both languages. I know how to investigate in both languages. I know where to look for information. So what are we going to do with these skills with our students today? When we redefine and we examine, and I want us to examine today, and we're going to our first point of reflection. We're going to look at here. If you can see the scared look on my face in the little corner of the screen, you know, there is no universally accepted definition of bilingualism. Bilingual education thus depends entirely on the context in which it is implemented. This was something that I discovered on my own, and then found that other educators who are writing studies are also encountering the same. I talk about my Honduran bilingual experience, and it's very different to my bilingual experience in my country. In my country, the education was divided into 3 parts. So we would do literature and language in all 3 languages, Spanish, English, and French. So I had to read Jean-Paul Sartre, I had to read Federico Garcia Lorca, and I had to read my readers in English as well, of which I credit the expansion of my vocabulary, having to read these elements. Now, in Honduras, not much literature is taught in English unless the school determines that in curriculum. And we're going to look at that and how that impacts. So I want to ask our audience, how would you describe private bilingual schools in Honduras? Are they truly bilingual, or are they monolingual English-speaking schools? And a point of reflection that I would like everyone to add their thoughts to the chat box. Are we ready to make changes to the curriculum in order to achieve balanced bilingualism around the world? Now, not just Honduras, around the world. Because the call center industry that came into Honduras, I think they opened up a revolution in what is happening with bilingual schools. Are they truly bilingual? That's my first question. Do we have any answers in the chat box, Diego? Or
we do.
What are people saying?
Sure. It says they are bilingual, but concentrate more in celebrating English rather than celebrating Spanish too.
Right. I would ask that person if you could put, for like 80% of the classes, are they taught in English, or are they taught, is there a balance of 50-50? What percentage is taught in English? If the person could answer us, because that percentage would tip the scale in terms of which language is the dominant language in the school, and thereby make it more of a monolingual school where Spanish is a subject, a monolingual English-speaking school, and where Spanish is one of the classes, as opposed to a bilingual program where you have equal classes in English, equal classes in Spanish, and you're exploring both things. Because if you do math all in English, my 7-year-old says this to me. He says, "Mommy, you know I don't count well in Spanish." And I'm like, "Honey, you do count in Spanish," but for him, consciously, he associates his numbers with English. Because in the pandemic, he's been exposed mostly to his brother and myself, and we maintain a tight English circle. So by speaking English and going on to his classes. Now, what I want is that, taking into account these strategies, we're going to look at how we apply that to teaching, especially when it comes to developing curriculum and what we do in our classrooms. Do we have any more comments?
We have a response to your question. It says here, I couldn't tell what percentage. It depends on the prestige of the school.
Okay, all right, definitely.
It says, bilingual schools in Honduras are private schools, and they are concentrated to teach the target language.
Yes, right, and that is true. That was something that I identified as well. So you have many bilingual schools, and there was a friend of mine who, she was the one who drew my attention to the idea that actually, well, so I mean, they're monolingual English speaking schools. And I came back and I thought about it. I said, well, actually that was right, because the focus of the program was speaking English. So and we're going to look at, in another slide, we're going to look at what that does in terms of the concepts of bilinguals and then expanding beyond that. So are we ready to make changes? Did anyone have any comments about the curriculum? Did anyone make any comments related to curriculum?
Not at all. It
Okay,
says, I think it's more content, grammar than communicative competence. That's
okay.
one of the comments here.
All right then. And so we're going to look at how can we, and we want to get some time to be able to collaborate and share with each other and have some breakout rooms where we actually try to come up with real strategies that we can use together. So we're reclassifying bilingualism basically. In reclassifying bilingualism, we are looking at individualistic bilingualism, which is dealing with our students, and societal bilingualism, which is family, neighborhood, community, culture, politics, regions. What are they saying? For me, here in Honduras I invite applied linguists to come and study the English and the Spanish that is here in Honduras, because it's quite an interesting study. Honduras from 1869 has had American Italian influence in it through the Vaccaro and the D'Antoni brothers, who brought with them the first set of commerce that started with trading coconuts and ended up into the Standard Fruit Company. What does that have to do with the language? From 1869, spaghetti and wheat flour have been introduced to this country. You will find a typical plate of white rice, green boiled bananas, and red spaghetti, and sometimes you'll have some fried chicken tossed in, and that is a typical dish prepared on the North Coast. Why is spaghetti a typical dish? Why is that red spaghetti put there? That was something that for me was totally curious, because spaghetti and rice are two carbohydrates in my experience. But I didn't understand how much influence the Italian culture has on the Honduran cuisine. And these would make amazing studies for the universities in Honduras, for students to study the language and look at how much Italian. I remember a family member from La Ceiba saying that cerveza is birria. And I'm like, no, we call it that. And in my voyage of studying Italian, I just came across the word birria is how they say beer in Italian. So I'm like, there's another evidence of it. The richness of the multilingual experience in Honduras. And that's something we're going to look at. How can we use that to reconstruct or to explore, perhaps not reconstruct, to explore the Honduran identity and the Honduran culture. This is one of the beautiful things about languages. But as educators, this presentation is about looking at individualistic bilingualism, how we focus on developing language abilities, and how is the language being used, how we plan for the student. Now, in order for me to do this, I must say that societal bilingualism definitely influences me. When I mentioned our linguistic repertoire at the beginning of the presentation, I am all the parts of the languages that I speak. The music, the culture, the poetry, the references, they are all part of who I am. And I want that for my children. I want that for my students. I teach adults. And when I teach adults and I get an adult who says, I want to learn to speak English. Okay. My first question is, how much do you read? When the student says not very much, immediately based on my experience, I start calculating where I'm going to start with them. If you're not a reader by nature, it is going to take a longer road to speak than if you are a natural reader. If you're a natural reader who enjoys words and you have a wonderful lexical development, it is not difficult to transition to another language because you have many codes. Reading provides us with all this richness of codes that we need to speak. And this is something where I am very, very, I would say that I'm an advocate for reading and literacy in all circles, French, English, Spanish, whatever it is. So point of reflection for me here. What kind of bilingualism drives your interest and how is it reflected in your classroom? So for me, because identity is important, I will ask my students, let's talk about heroes. Okay. And they'll immediately think of heroes in English. And I'll say, no, what about your local heroes? Identify, talk about your local heroes. So they need to research. No, well, they give me what's in the social studies books. I said, no, what about your personal heroes? Who are they? They start talking about themselves. They start talking about the people. Interview someone that you know. Bring that information into the classroom, but in English. So even though I'm learning about their context, their family, their neighborhood, the things that influence them, but we're learning it in English, they become more motivated because they're not just talking about a hero that's in a book that they're disconnected from. They're actually talking about people, real people that they can connect to. That sense of connection, that whether they, even now with online classes, have the students interview their family. In my country, we are fascinated with names, the origin of your names, the influence. What is your naming story? Everyone, I believe, should know their naming story. Whether it was you were named after a day on a calendar, or whether you were named after your father's best friend. I had the opportunity to meet a young man who was definitely Asian in descent, and his first name was Jaime, I believe, was a very Latino name and a very distinctive Asian name. And I was like, can I ask you, I don't mean to butt in, I mean, like, how is this possible? And he said, when my father and my mother first came to Latin America, the person who helped them was this gentleman. And my father, in order to honor the memory of this gentleman and how he had served our family, he named me his firstborn. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that a beautiful testimony of where that young man's name comes from, honoring another person? And I go back to my opening quote. Bilingualism, it brings the diversity and the beauty of the world to us in what it is we're doing. So when I ask my students to investigate their life, the people around them, the community that they're in, things that interest them, those things come back into the classroom, and then we work them in developing the linguistic abilities, be it reading, writing. It doesn't matter if they have to investigate in Spanish at first. Then we do the job of translating it, investigating, finding the vocabulary. Now, I, as a private company owner, I have a certain freedom with my curriculum. I can create and design as I please. I know that many individuals do not have that freedom. And this is kind of like what most educators are facing right now. Bilingualism is not just speaking two languages. Bilingualism now, the field, and this is just some of the research that's out there. This is not everything. You're welcome to investigate on your own. Bilingualism, when we're dealing with students in the classroom, we're dealing with bilingual individuals. And then we have, how is the perception of the bilingual society? What are the politics of it? Do we uphold one idea more than another? Do we believe that because they're English speakers, they're better than us? Is that idea invading our way of thinking? And if that idea is invading our way of thinking, then it's time to stop, take stock, and come back to our multilingual roots. That's what this presentation is about. Teaching bilinguals in a multilingual world, recognizing our value, their historical value to what they add. I tell my students, English is a tool, just like any language. It's a key. It can open a door and you can get multiple keys. Find a different key, learn how to use it, and open another door. I can open a French door, a Spanish door, an English door, a Hindi one, and I can kind of open an Italian one. I have to move it around a little bit, but I think I can open an Italian one a little bit. This is what becoming bilinguals in a multilingual world is about. There are no barriers with the internet. We have access to tons and tons of YouTube videos. We can hear real speakers sharing their lives. We have access to real content. We are no longer constrained by using content that has been pre-produced. Educators today can become content producers, and content from your students' context. This is the most important part. If we can generate the motivation to get our students to create their entire family history in an English album, but not just the pictures. Where did your grandfather come from? What is the story? Some of these stories might be painful, but then we're touching on social and emotional learning. We're not just going into the language, we're asking them to talk about things, and they're leaving a historical record in another language. They're learning the power of history, the power of writing, the power of these stories. Now, we have bilingualism, the bilingual individual, the bilingual society, and all of that produces bilingual education. And that comes into what we are all doing here today. This is a bilingual classroom with those that are in attendance, and I am speaking in English. It's predominantly in Spanish. I have used some terms in Spanish here and there, but Colin Baker's research has demonstrated that there are two types. There are weak types of bilingual education, and there are strong types. The weak types tend to have submersion, where they dismiss L1 and it's all about the dominant language. The L2, which is your target language. If your target language is English, then it's all about English, English, English. What happens to very young learners? What are we creating in them? Are we adding value when we think of the bilingual society that they will grow into? Do they feel superior or inferior because of their languages? Are we contributing because we have our preset notions of prejudice? I think my presentation today, when I sat down to look at this, because these are real things that concern me when it comes to my own children. I do not want them to feel like misfits. I want them to own their identity in more than one language and where they come from. I want them to own the history that is behind them. And I want that for my students as well. I want my students to decide where they want to go with their language, how they want to use their language. And I provide them with the language abilities or the skills needed in order to develop that. And that brings us to strategy. Because as we see in the weak types, anything that is transitional, that moves from L1 to L2, leaving L1 behind, it is a weaker form of bilingual education because it creates a sense of one is better than the other. I'm leaving this one behind to go to the other. If we can have strong programs that include dual immersion, that use both languages, that find a way to balance it, heritage learning, mixing the culture into it, promoting the development equally of both languages. If you're going to do literature in English, do literature in Spanish. If you're going to read Federico Garcia Lorca, read also some of that more in English. You've got to read that. It's about opening your mind and looking at the world through the eyes of these individuals, looking at it in order to expand our world vision. Multicultural development. If we're in a multilingual society, if we're participating in a global society, then yes, multicultural development, taboos, what we say, what we don't say, researching that in class. Now, again, all of this comes back to the number one challenge that we do have, which is curriculum. So I am fully aware that what I'm saying is not I do have certain liberties as a private business owner, but can we create the classrooms and the schools that we wish to have? So one of the things that the primary societal goal of weak forms bilingual education is not bilingualism, but assimilation into the dominant culture and monolingualism in the dominant language. So monolingualism, our point of reflection in L2, can threaten the survival of L1 for future learners. My question to the audience is, do you agree or disagree with this statement? And if you agree with it, what can we do about it? You know?
Professor Rajkummar, I would like to address some comments we have on our YouTube channel.
Please do.
Yes, there's one here. It says, the kids may need, this is a comment, the kids may need to get level by extra classes sometimes in the native language, at least more than in English. At least that was my experience with some students. There's a question here. Do you think the L1 could be used as a tool to teach L2 without excessive use of course?
Yes, Yes, 100% yes. Actually, I am very pleased that tomorrow on Saturday morning, I will be presenting and I'll give a little glimpse of that, but we will be discussing gamifying teaching, gamifying our lesson plans. Yes, I had to do that. I was being paid to provide strategies for my adult executives, and I did not have the luxury of making a mistake. I did not have the luxury of a long program. These were men and women whose salary depended on their ability to speak English. So I needed to be able to define projects or elements that would be able to provide those results and allow them to do their job. That led me to the need of having to eliminate the lengthy grammatical discussions that we have when we're trying to describe something. And I found that, hey, bam, 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 in Spanish, describe something, draw their attention to it grammatically, and then go back to the English. I started using the Spanish for instructions, to not waste time or create what Krashen would call the affective filter, anxiety, frustration, because they're not understanding the instructions. So I decided to eliminate that part and process of having to do a million signs to get them to understand. I would give them the instructions. They knew what they had to do, but now we were going to do it in English. And that promoted and provided results. It provided results. My students were, I understand what, especially in the adult, because the adult is accustomed to managing their life. They're accustomed to dealing with order. They're accustomed to doing things. So when they feel incompetent, it is a personal attack against their sense of self. They feel stupid. They lock down. It's fight or flight. You get different reactions. So we cannot be an educator today and not be aware of social and emotional impact of learning or the exercises. We cannot apply exercises blindly without understanding the impact it can have on our learner today, be it a child, an adolescent, or an adult. I have found that teaching at all three levels, I taught high school in my country for 8 years before coming to Honduras. And I taught college students and I taught middle school, what would be called middle school students. And comparing my results there and comparing, I applied the same elements of creativity and the results were always the same. Student focus, focusing on the student, what are their needs? Identify their needs and then create, and I'm hoping, Diego, I don't know how much, if I'm running out of time. I'm hoping we have time to go into breakout rooms. How much time do we have, Diego?
See,
okay, we have like about.
We will be done at 4:30. We have a
Okay.
couple of minutes, more than, I would say, 18 minutes.
All right, then. So we'll use the chat box if we don't get to the breakout room sessions. So what is the number one strategy for teaching bilinguals in a multilingual world? Creativity. We want to stimulate. Creativity is an awesome way to encourage students to engage with and produce language. Now, what I love about this here is produce language. This is what it is I did with my adults. We went about producing language because when they had to produce it, be it a letter to a vendor or a contract for someone, they had to apply. They ended up asking me. I stopped teaching grammar. So I turned the tables. Okay, let's write the letter. So, all right. So they start writing their letter, but how do you do this? Or how? So then the grammar became very Socratic. They would ask, and it was incidental. And that is how we ended up dealing with grammar. And I know that in school settings, in traditional school settings, the inflexibility of the curriculum is the number one challenge, which is one of the reasons why we need administrators and we need individuals at the level of policy change to be involved in this process and to understand the undertaking of what it is to be bilingual. I think if anyone has gotten it by now, bilingual right now is just another way of saying multilingual. There's a shadow of it. It's no longer bi for two because there's so many linguistic influences in what we're doing on a daily basis right now. This for me is the number one principle that educators should take away from when you're creating lessons for your students. Context become important in your decision making. Bilingual children simultaneously learn to read and write in both languages. I can say I've experimented with my kids with both. And I think this is the thing that bilingual parents do. My children became my guinea pigs. And what I did with the first one, I decided with the second one, I wanted to test and see if it would be different. I even went through the fear of thinking that, did I shortchange the little one? Did I not do as much as I did with the older one? But they both demonstrate totally different skill sets. The first one, and this is something that we can apply with our kids. If we're going full on, I wanted my older son to be able to have confidence and competent and use his Spanish. Actually, he corrects me because I'm not native Spanish, but I use my Spanish, and he will make corrections and he understands and uses both languages. My little one, having the circle of English between the older brother and myself, the three of us communicate in English. His viewing, we watch videos in English. His entertainment is in English. So his socializing is in Spanish, but because his day-to-day is in English, his teachers think that he lived in a foreign country. He was born in Honduras and he speaks like a little, well, he doesn't sound Caribbean. He speaks more like a little American because of the influence of the influences in his linguistic repertoire. But what is beautiful is that no one identifies. Now, I did not get involved in his spelling. My oldest son was a spelling champ. I took time to do that. And I sometimes feel very guilty as a mom of not doing the same level of spelling with the little one. But the little one has developed a way of thinking in both of the languages. So when he says senda, mommy senda me tal cosa, or he'll say, Miss, cito a page, or cito, he's not saying necesito, but he's just cutting it down to what he needs to get. I mean, he has a very practical way of using the language. These kinds of codes demonstrate other thinking processes. And this was something in the individual bilingualism where you see it's all about how we think, how we process. It's about cognition. It's about how we learn. And as educators, if we focus on those things, we will find that context, whether I'm in Spain, France, Honduras, Trinidad and Tobago, Canada, USA, teach to the context you are in. It will ease the frustration of your students, and it will help them stand better, feel better, become more confident so that they can go forward into a different world. But when we try to teach too much of a context that's unfamiliar, sometimes we lose them. They lose interest because it's not their context. It's not their life. It's not what they're about. So sometimes we will have to change books, or in my case, I ended up writing the books that we use with my students. And I know of other teachers who have done that too.
We have a comment here about context.
Sure. Yes.
It says also the context helped me choose interesting topics to engage my students.
Definitely, 100%. I agree 100% with that. Context allowed me, I think, for engaging students, I speak to their life, their work, and their community. What more? They participate in the production of the language. And when they can produce, we go to the tools. So they understand. If I need to produce something, I go to the tools for it. Context, rules. And I tell that to my students, and that is like the number one thing. I would get a t-shirt. Context, rules when it comes to language learning. Speak to the context you're in, and you will find that, wow, you're dominating on context. And before you know it, you want to learn something else. Here on the screen, I have a very, very simple phrase. And I want to ask everyone, have you ever told someone you love them, but in a different language? Have you ever said it, and how did it feel? Or how do you express love? Do you say te amo? Do you use I love you, je t'aime? How do you express love in your family and with your friends? Is it in Spanish, in English? What language do you use to express love? Is anyone sharing, Diego?
I would like to invite our YouTube attendees as well to comment on the chat, and we can read their comments.
Please do. How do you express love?
They're saying responding both English,
okay,
Spanish and English as well, Italian.
Very interesting. Now, I have, this is where it goes. I asked my son, I said, honey, he says, you know, mom, I use I love you more. I said, really? Why? He said, I think te amo is too intense. Huh. I'm like, okay. So my next question is, when you say I love you, and because it's common and apparently it's very well heard all over, who do you tell te amo to, as opposed to who you say I love you to? I think Diego's smiling. So I imagine Diego just thought, who do I read?
English and Spanish, depending of the persons. Some of them are mentioning. Wow. Express both in English. It depends on the formality they're saying or how close they feel to the person.
So they use English depending on how close?
Exactly. Either language, depending on how close they are. Yes, because let me see. Oh yeah, it says here, a foreign language feels more impersonal.
There it is. That's it. I remember, and I, oh my God, I'm going to say this on camera, but I kind of cheated when it came to with my husband, who would express te amo, and I would say te amo. I would repeat in Spanish, but I was hiding behind the expression, but it wasn't saying it. I remember the way I felt because I'm a native English speaker. The first time I said, I love you in English. The first time I said, I love you, oh my goodness, I felt like, and his name was at the end of that. It was completely different. And many of the students that I have, they don't use te amo. In Honduras, I found many of my students hide behind te quiero. They use a lot of te quiero. And I said, who do you use te amo with and who do you use te quiero with? So imagine the discussion in English in a classroom about phrases like this. And if we flip the class from love to discuss hate, or even to discuss thank you, we can say thank you. You can have gracias in another language. And I remember someone talking about Farsi, and they said that when you express thank you, it's like saying a million thanks to you for something that you've done. It is the beauty of these cultural expressions and using contrast and compare to build metalinguistic awareness. This is what we are, I think, as bilingual educators, this is our new mission, building awareness, linguistic awareness, and finding creative ways to do it, and using characters and promoting and creating social and emotional learning. Because I believe that we see the damage among adults who do not have emotional intelligence.
Sorry for interrupting. We have only a couple of minutes, 5 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately.
Okay, then. So just to wrap up, strategies in the classroom to promote biliteracy. These are the three takeaways. It should be cross-curriculum, collaborative, and using a very personalized approach. Those three elements. Cross-curriculum, why? Talk to your administrators. Show them the presentation. Redefine bilingualism for them. We cannot do it alone. It is not like before. And collaborative. Work as a team. Get the math teacher involved, get the art teacher involved, get a team involved, and create a class as an entire team and personalize it. Maybe an entire year could be dedicated to the history of the school. That is an investigation done in English, but about the school and the community and where the people are from. And every year you do something different. You will provide the data that you need for your curriculum. You need to meet the goals, but you would be doing it using content that is based on their own context. I believe that you can attain goals, and that's something that we're going to look at in our next session. And you can also help your students create a linguistic map, kind of like this. Help them track their language learning experiences, motivate them to keep on learning. They create the different languages, they look at where it comes from. And I would go so far as to say, even if you did a little map in Honduras, Tegucigalpa, La Ceiba, and San Pedro Sula, for what you call topoillos, in English, sucker bags or ice blocks, La Ceiba, I think, is pilones. And in San Pedro Sula, they're called...
Oh my God. In San Pedro Sula, Charamusca and Tegucigalpa.
Charamusca, that's it. So I mixed up my cities. Thank you very much. So imagine the linguistic repertoire in only Honduras. The differences in the influence from the different parts of the world. So this is to wrap up very, very, very easily. I'm going to save this slide for Saturday, and I'm going to close with the same quote that I opened with. Bilinguals help preserve the variety and therefore the beauty in diversity of our world. Bilinguals are environmentally friendly people. With that, I stop sharing. I am here with everyone. I get a chance to see you guys and connect a little bit before we close our presentation. But we are environmentally friendly people. I love that description of us. And if this is my presentation for now, remember collaborative, cross-curriculum, and personalize. 3 strategies that if you let loose your creativity, I promise you, you will have fun and your students will be truly engaged. It has been a pleasure of mine to serve the community of Honduras with this. This is something that I love and a pleasure to serve. And I must say congratulations to La Universidad Pedagógica. I have met many of your teachers. They are excellent professionals out there. So, kudos to what you guys are doing, and I wish you all the best. If there are any questions, the floor is open. Diego?
Thank you, Professor Rajkummar. This has been a very insightful session. You have touched upon very important topics, and I would just like to remind our audience to follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook, and may you all have a great evening, and we hope to see you in the remaining sessions. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.